there and welcome back to another House of the Dragon video. And today we'll be talking about the latest episode to drop, episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea, which as the title may suggest, heavily features Daemon and gives us a healthy dose of degenerate incest. And people are shipping them too. Anyway, still a really great episode, and this show's well and truly cementing itself as my favourite thing on TV. I mean, nothing else is even coming close. And so with all that being said, let's jump into the review. So we start off the episode, seemingly at Storm's End, the Baratheon castle, where various lords of the Stormlands and Riverlands are making their suits for Rhaenyra's hand, and honestly, she really bungles this whole thing. Like, I get it, it's not exactly great to have to listen to all these people beg for your hand in marriage, but at the same time, at least she gets to choose, unlike most noble people in Westeros. And on top of that, she gives to live in the luxury of being crown princess. When she marries somebody, she's still going to be in charge, as after all, she's heir to the throne. And on top of that, she doesn't even have to choose anybody unless she actually likes them. And yet despite all these factors, she belittles the old lord and publicly shames him by calling him old enough to have been her great-grandfather. Whew, damn. She didn't have to marry him, but did she have to be so mean? And then the next suitor, the young Lord Blackwood, tries to make his case and is jeered at and mocked for being too weak and small by a Bracken, their longtime rival, with Rhaenyra joining in on the laughter. And so then swords are drawn, and the kid actually manages to gut the Bracken, and, well, there goes an heir to one of the most powerful houses in the Riverlands. I'm sure that won't kick off any more instability. But also, talk shit, get hit. I get it. Imagine getting wrecked by a 12-year-old kid. Whew, damn. But anyway, instead of continuing on with her progress in the realm, she decides to return to King's Landing 2 months early, so a bunch of nobles, probably in the Reach, who are very powerful, are going to feel quite insulted. Truly, she is a political genius. And the worst part is, she knows her dad's going to be pissed about this, as Criston Cole makes very clear as they approach King's Landing by ship, and yet, she does it anyway. And then, who should fly by on their dragon? Why, it's Daemon! And honestly, it looks like he purposefully knocks the ship with Caraxes just to be a dick. Which, that was kind of amusing. And then she stares dreamily after the dragon, so yeah. Pretty clear who she actually wants to marry. Ugh. Gross. And then we have a look at Viserys, who's preparing to welcome Daemon to King's Landing with the full fanfare. Crown, the entire court packed into the throne room, Kingsguard at the ready, holding Blackfire. And then Daemon enters, also wearing a crown, as he's been named King of the Narrow Sea by Corlys Velaryon, but he lays down the crown and swears fealty to his brother once again, ceding the stepstones to the Iron Throne. And after a brief tense stare down, the brothers embrace, and for the moment, we can all pretend that this is going to have a happy ending for the two of them. We then cut to later in the day, where there's a bit of a party going on, celebrating Daemon's return. And we actually get a fun little bit of backstory for the brothers through their banter. At last, we see them act like brothers, telling stories about their adventures as children, bantering about who was their mother's favourite child, or reminiscing on what her personality was like. And then we see that Viserys is still pissed at Rhaenyra, and I'm not surprised. I mean, they haven't even had a chance to chat yet. And so Alicent tries to smooth things over by suggesting that Daemon go with her to see the new tapestries to give Rhaenyra a chance to speak with her father, only for that suggestion to blow up in her face completely and have Viserys and Daemon laugh her out of the building, which, that's just very sad. This poor woman just looks so depressed. But despite this, she still goes to try and talk to Rhaenyra, to try and make her see that she really does have it good compared to basically every single woman in the realm, that even though it's pretty fucked up, nobody else even has a choice, so she should take advantage of that fact. And then it's just made abundantly clear just how empty her life is and how lonely she is as the queen in the tower, treated like a broodmare. And very quickly, she's just become the show's most sympathetic character to me. I just feel terrible for this woman. And then she goes on to start talking about how she feels that nobody wants to be her true friend anymore since she became the queen, that they all keep her at a bit of a distance. So really, her dad's pretty much ruined her life. But at least her and Rhaenyra do manage to reconnect here, but we'll see how long that lasts. We then have a scene that starts to build the romantic and sexual tension for the eventual incest. Talking all seductively to each other in Valyrian, telling her how much she's grown in the last 4 years, telling her that marriage needs to only be a political arrangement and that after she's wed, she can do whatever she likes, hint hint. Also, it's crazy how much he hates his wife, always calling her his bronze bitch, saying a child could never grow in such a hostile environment. But anyway, back to the incest vibes. He gets right back into grooming his niece by telling her that it seems like such a lonely prospect for her to not want marriage or sex because she fears that birthing heirs will kill her like it did her mother, and that she should be open to enjoying her life. Icky, but we'll move on. Because next up we have a small council meeting. Nice to see that Rhaenyra has actually been given a seat this time and isn't still pouring the wine for everybody. With the current hot topic of the conversation being Lord Velaryon going rogue and abandoning the Stepstones after the war had ended, but also crowning Daemon King of the Narrow Sea, which suggests that he isn't really taking his daughter being snubbed all too well, even though it's been literal years. And then it's reported that the Sea Lord of Braavos and Lord Velaryon are in negotiations for a marriage between their children, which further hints at the sea snake's making moves, and probably needs to be pacified in some way that's going to soothe his pride. The solution that the council seems to want is for Rhaenyra to marry somebody to offset the potential power that the Velaryons would get with a marriage to the Free Cities. And then we have another dose of depression as we see Alicent living out the life that Rhaenyra described earlier, the broodmare locked in the tower. And unsurprisingly, she looks dead inside. Anyway, it doesn't take long for Daemon to enact his plan, as when Rhaenyra arrives in her room for the night, he's left out peasant clothes and a hat to hide her identity, and instructions telling her how to use the secret passageways in the walls to get out of her room undetected. And so she very loudly opens the passageway and leaves the room, and old Uncle Daemon's waiting for her to take her on a grand tour of the streets of King's Landing. And this scene's a lot of fun. It really has something for everybody. Drunk people, street performers, public sex, violence, a fortune teller who asks if she wishes to know her death before we cut to one of those dragon statues shooting fire. And while she gets to enjoy the nightlife, Alicent has to bathe stinky Viserys covered in sores. Ugh. But back to the streets, where we get to watch a street play which, well, it mocks the royal family, and it shows that the small folk, well, they aren't on board with Rhaenyra as heir. They think it should go to Viserys' son instead, which in turn prompts Rhaenyra to publicly heckle and boo the play, whilst Daemon gives her a reality check, that the small folk aren't on her side at the moment, which she disregards. As to her, their wishes are of no consequence. That feels like a bit of foreshadowing, but anyway, after that she leads Daemon on a merry chase through the city, and they run into Harwin Strong, who lets them go off with Daemon, holding hands, and from gross to gross as Alicent is summoned to her husband's bedchambers in the middle of the night by a maid. Lovely, couldn't even be bothered to come himself. Also, what the hell is with all the porn on the walls? But anyway, you thought the weird stuff ended here? Well, it doesn't, because Daemon takes Rhaenyra to a brothel, which is intercut with Viserys, giving it a good old college try, and failing, as once again Alicent is dead inside, and fair enough. The dude is old, he is rotting away, and he probably stinks, and he just seems to be bad at sex. Ugh! Gets the skin crawling, that's for sure. Especially when she has to do that horrible fake smile. Ugh. But back to the brothel. Daemon removes Rhaenyra's hat just to ensure that she'll be recognised before he takes her into the seediest possible room where the public orgies are occurring. Oh, not a very classy looking establishment, and also it just looks like it would smell so bad in there. And then, well, there's nothing else for it but a bit of good old fashioned incest, and yeah, not much else to say. They kiss, they fondle, they start to strip, and then he can't go through with it. And apparently the explanation from the creators is that he can't get it up once he saw that she was into it, which is pretty disturbing. So he leaves her there with her pants down and he runs off into the night, and so does she, before she's spotted by a little kid who seems like a little bird for some spy master. Whilst back in the king's chambers, Alicent is still dead inside and there's a rat on the bed. Oh, they need some cats for this castle, methinks. No wonder Viserys is rotting away. There's no sense of hygiene in this place. And so Rhaenyra arrives back at the castle, still pretty worked up I guess, and so she decides she's going to go from incest to sort of coercing her employee into sex. An employee who's sworn to celibacy and would be gelded or executed if it came out that this happened, but that doesn't matter to her. No time for that, because it's time for sex. And I did think they did it well to show how conflicted he is. Coming into the show, the perception I had from the fandom about this character was that he was going to be a massive incel. So I wonder if that's still going to be the case, or if he's simply going to be bitter that he compromised his honour in the first place. Anyway though, I'm not a huge connoisseur of sex scenes in general, but this one was better shot than most, I would say. So yeah, let's move on. As next up, Sir Otto gets a message from that little kid regarding what Rhaenyra's been up to, and Daemon wakes up in some random hovel with Mysaria watching over him. And so yeah, she's definitely the person in charge of having those little kids run around, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Daemon is in on this too. He wanted Rhaenyra to be seen with him. It's all part of the plan. We then return to Otto, who finds himself having to tell Viserys that his daughter went to a brothel with Daemon, and I like that even though he's a schemer, even he doesn't want to do this. he's shitting himself the whole time. And to say that Viserys does not take this well, yeah, that's putting it lightly. And he blames Otto for having Rhaenyra followed in the first place because he wants Aegon to be heir. And, well, yeah, he does have a point. The dude is very obviously beginning to overreach. But anyway, he leaves the room and Alicent overheard everything. And so she summons Rhaenyra to the Godswood to find out the truth. And here, we plant the seeds for the destruction of their friendship, as when Alicent questions Rhaenyra about what happened, she deflects and avoids and makes excuses. She suggests that questioning her virtue is treason. She tries to play it off as idle gossip, and then she finally swears on her mother's memory that Daemon never touched her. Yeah, whoops, that lie is eventually going to get exposed, but for now, she believes her. And so in the end, this is going to make her feel very betrayed. And then this leads us to Daemon, who's arriving back at the Red Keep, hungover as all hell, where he's apprehended by the Kingsguard and taken to the throne room for a private audience with his brother. A brother who has seemingly reached the end of his tether. As he kicks him, he chokes him, he puts a knife against his throat, and honestly, the dude's lucky he didn't get gelded. People have had their bits and pieces chopped off for less in this world. And honestly, whilst this scene does make Viserys look like a bit of a badass, it also exposes how weak he is, as Daemon can seemingly do anything and get away with a slap on the wrist and a banishment. Hell, he can even tell his brother he wants to take his daughter, who he supposedly ruined, as a second wife. Which pretty much just makes it clear that the whole reason he even did all this was to try and get closer to the throne. And yet Viserys does nothing. Anyway, afterwards, Alicent tries to tell Viserys that Rhaenyra is innocent and that she swore a vow that this was true. But it's clear that Viserys thinks that Rhaenyra is full of shit, and rightfully so. And he then summons her to his chambers to give her a scolding, but not before we get more Aegon the Conqueror backstory, where he talks about how the prince who was promised will come from his line, etc, etc, Song of Ice and Fire, and since this show is canon to the Game of Thrones show, if there is some sort of afterlife for the Targaryens, he's got to be feeling pretty silly once it turns out the prophesied saviour of Westeros is not his descendant, but in fact Arya Stark, with no known blood connection to the Conqueror. In the end, he does have a lot of descendants, so maybe his blood does get passed through a number of houses and eventually gets into House Stark. Who knows? But otherwise, oopsie. Anyway, she has to marry Sir Laenor, but she also manages to do the old switcheroo and convinces her dad to fire Sir Otto as Hand of the King, which is once again going to be a pretty big tear in the relationship between the Queen and the Princess, I'd expect. Oh, and he also has moon tea sent to Rhaenyra by the Grand Maester, which is basically a morning after drink to prevent pregnancy. And then they leave it ambiguous as to whether she drinks it at all, so that should be interesting. But yeah, that's the end of the episode, and whilst it was deeply uncomfortable at times, this show is just going from strength to strength and getting better every week. I'm really loving it. Let's just hope the quality doesn't take a drastic nosedive like the original show. I mean, I still have trust issues from Game of Thrones, but with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.